of the agent who shot and killed a woman in her car.
You have a federal law enforcement official engaging in federal law enforcement action. That's a federal issue. That guy is protected by absolute immunity. He was doing his job.
Also at this hour, doubling down. Why more ICE agents are heading to Minneapolis to carry out what ICE calls the largest immigration operation ever. Also this evening, rebuilding a nation outside of our own. Why President Trump now says the United States could be in charge of Venezuela for years. The State Department with us tonight here on the Hill, and the quote-unquote dream military. Do we need $1.5 trillion for the U.S. military? How that has now become the new ask from the Commander-in-Chief. But first tonight, fresh protests. A day after an ICE agent shot and killed a 37-year-old mother. A live look in Minneapolis as the vigil there grows. Of course, what we witnessed yesterday caught on camera in this part of the scene since. The Vice President, J.D. Vance, today outlining the administration's stance. And he did so from the White House briefing room, supporting the ICE agent.
That woman is part of a broader left-wing network to attack, to dox, to assault, and to make it impossible for our ICE officers to do their job.
However, cities across the nation decrying the president's immigration crackdown as Democratic leaders in Minnesota continue to call for the Trump administration to pull ICE agents from their streets. The former governor of Minnesota, Tim Pawlenty, with us in moments. Libby Dean is over at the White House, but we begin tonight here on the Hill with our Brian Enton in Minneapolis. Brian, where I hear the protesters around you are gathering at this hour.
They are. This is actually the spot where Renee Good, the woman in the car, hit the pole and died, and it's turned into a memorial. I'll step out of the way and show you. You can see there's candles and there's flowers, and this is where people have been gathering. That pole right there, that light pole, if you remember from the video when the SUV crashed into a pole, that's the pole right there. But I want to show you something interesting, Blake. If you walk with me over here around the crowd, they've really closed off this area. When I say they, I don't mean the police, I mean the protesters. And it almost reminds me of when I was here for George Floyd, when there was that autonomous zone. They've just decided to start closing off this neighborhood, and you can see they've even started a fire down here. They're starting to pitch tents. There's like little mini security checkpoints when you come in. Again, not the police, but just the protesters who are sort of keeping track of who's going in and out, and they ask you what news agency you're from and then basically decide whether you're allowed to come in. So it's kind of interesting to see them sort of close off the area. They're not happy that the state of Minnesota is not going to be investigating the shooting. They have a special commission that the mayor of Minneapolis said he wanted to investigate, but the FBI is not providing them the materials they need to investigate and has said that they will not be participating in the investigation, which is something the protesters here are very, very upset about, Blake.
Wow. Our Brian Enton live there on the streets in Minnesota tonight. Brian, thank you. Over to the White House now, and our Libby Dean joins us with the administration's side of the argument today. Hello, Libby.
Hey, Blake, the vice president going on defense today in that briefing room saying he has no concerns with the ICE agents' actions. And no matter what angle you watch that video, it should be clear to Americans that the woman was attempting to hit that ICE agent there. That's the vice president's message. He went on to also claim without direct evidence that the woman was part of this broader left-wing network. Let's take a listen to the vice president.
The simple fact is, what you see is what you get in this case. You have a woman who was trying to obstruct a legitimate law enforcement operation. Nobody debates that. You have a woman who aimed her car at a law enforcement officer and pressed on the accelerator.
The vice president was asked over and over about how he and the president plan to lower the temperature in America right now. And his advice to Americans is actually to take their anger out at the ballot box rather than on the streets.
I think that we can all recognize that the best way to turn down the temperature is to tell people to take their concerns about immigration policy to the ballot box. Stop assaulting and stop inciting violence against our law enforcement officers. That's the best way to take down the temperature.
Now, the president has not commented on camera about this incident in Minneapolis, but the administration and we know Republicans have really stood by this ICE agent and ICE as a whole time and time again throughout the last 2 days, as of course we're still waiting for those details, which would be revealed as a result of an investigation, which we know, as Brian was mentioning there, Blake, that the FBI has now taken complete control of, and you heard there that from the vice president as well. Blake.
Libby Dean, live for us tonight over at the White House. Libby, thank you. Now to Tim Pawlenty, served as the governor there in Minnesota for a couple terms, 2003 to 2011. Former presidential candidate as well joins us live tonight once again here on the Hill. Governor, thanks for being with us. I know you've had now, I guess, sort of half a day, call it, to process this. Where are you tonight on what's happening in your state? And what have you witnessed today from your lens?
A very sad and tragic day in Minneapolis and in Minnesota, another one, and there's been a lot of them in this state. So my heart is heavy for my state, and as on a human level, regardless of the politics of the woman who was shot, Ms. Good, you know, you hate to see that any of that, and our condolences go out to her family. She's a mother, she's got other relatives, she's a loved one of lots of people. So on a human level, of course, we are concerned about that. I'm glad the protests today have been mostly peaceful. That's terrific. I'm also just amazed by how everybody has already gone to their, red and blue teams as to how they view this video, how politicians made big legal conclusions, sweeping conclusions within hours of this event without all the evidence even being started to be collected. So I really wish that didn't happen, but that's the world we live in. And I hope now that the investigation can flesh out all the facts and we can get a fair result.
So along that side, let me play some sound from both the White House and Minnesota. But here's J.D. Vance, who went to the podium, the vice president, earlier today.
That woman was there to interfere with a legitimate law enforcement operation in the United States of America. That woman is part of a broader left-wing network to attack, to dox, to assault, and to make it impossible for our ICE officers to do their job.
Is he on the right tone there?
Well, the tone is pretty strong. I don't know what information he has to back that up. I'm sure they'll release it if they have it, but I don't know that the vice president would be at a podium making those kind of claims without the facts and data to back it up. So in the coming days or weeks, they're going to have to back that up. I can't comment on whether, it's sufficient, but as to the tone, it's a strong tone for sure.
Here was the governor there, Tim Walz, one of your predecessors, speaking today.
This is a brazen use of force. They want us to bend the knee. They want us to capitulate. The way we give them what they want is allow them to use this as an excuse to put more troops on the ground. Use them as an excuse to show that these are violent protests.
What do you make of what the governor's saying there tonight in your home state?
Well, it's, ICE has been in Minnesota and in Minneapolis for decades. And, there hasn't been this big a problem before. And of course, we have this weird standoff where the federal agencies don't trust the locals because they're sanctuary cities and it's a sanctuary state, unfortunately. And so they don't want to give them information or cooperate with them. And the locals won't cooperate or protect the ICE officials. And so you have no partnership at all going with these two agencies. And the rhetoric as to whether it's being political or not, this woman undeniably parked her car across the street in a way that blocked traffic. You saw the rest of the video. You got to watch it from both the front and the side. People can draw their own conclusions. But she was there in part to protest, but she did in some level obstruct legal process, no question.
Do you think the Trump administration should send more ICE agents into Minnesota as they are?
I don't know that it's the volume, but obviously this has now been very politicized. It's very emotional. You can see that in the tone of that's being used by all the speakers. It's political at some level. Unfortunately, it's a tragedy turned political. We do have a significant immigration problem here, but I don't think the question is the volume of ICE officers. It's how the protesters, the public officials, and the leaders either receive and help that effort or obstruct it, or in some cases violently resist it.
Let me leave you with this. As a former governor there of Minnesota and the investigation being handled at the federal level and not at the local level, is that something you would have been comfortable with?
Given the dynamics here and all the mistrust and all the conspiracy theories, I think everybody would be well served if they jointly investigated the Bureau of Criminal Apprehension in Minnesota or the BCA is a highly regarded professional law enforcement and investigatory agency. They wouldn't be a problem in terms of the politics either way. And I think they would also add a lot of credibility to whatever the results were that came out. So I think that's a missed opportunity. And I think it would have gone better that way. And it certainly would have endeared more trust or, generated more trust in the outcome.
Real quick before I run, Tim Walz, the governor, has threatened to potentially use the National Guard. Is that needed? Should he even consider it?
Well, so far he doesn't have to because the protests have been peaceful. He was severely criticized, and I think rightfully so, about being slowed and delayed in calling out the National Guard in the wake of the George Floyd protests. And so I'm sure he's going to try to not repeat that very bad mistake again. I think they're ready to go if needed, but so far not needed, and that's a good thing.
All right, Tim Pawlenty with us tonight, former governor there in Minnesota, his state, of course, in the middle of one of the biggest stories, if not the biggest right now in this country this evening. Governor, thanks for being with us tonight here on the Hill. Appreciate it. Talk soon.
Thank you.
Still to come. The U.S. military operation in Venezuela lasted a few hours or so, but how long will the U.S. oversight of that country last? Why the president is now saying it could be years. Plus, President Trump calling for a $1.5 trillion defense budget. Retired Brigadier General Congressman Don Bacon joins us to tell us if he thinks that's necessary or not. And we continue to watch Minneapolis, the ongoing scenes there. You heard from Brian Enton, some of the folks there on the ground at that memorial basically deciding who gets to go where. If news breaks out, Brian is on the ground for us. I thank you for being with us tonight. I'm Blake Burman, back on the other side of the break, 4 minutes out. I'll see you then. Just days after the United States captured the Venezuelan dictator Nicolas Maduro, President Trump says the U.S. may control the country potentially for years. The president saying in an interview published in the New York Times that the U.S. is looking to rebuild Venezuela, a plan that's centered on the South American country's oil reserves. In a lengthy interview with the Times, the president saying, quote, "We're going to be using oil and we're going to be taking oil. We're getting oil prices down, and we're going to be giving money to Venezuela, which they desperately need." Now, OPEC says that Venezuela has more than 300 billion barrels of crude oil, give or take that number somewhere around there. So if you look at what the price of oil is going for at this moment, somewhere around 58 bucks worth, that puts the value of Venezuela's oil supply in the area of $17.5 trillion. Joining me now is Tommy Pigott. He is the State Department Principal Deputy Spokesperson with us tonight here on the Hill. Tommy, thanks for being in. Nice to see you again.
Yeah.
So I think most Americans will see that headline that we are going to be in Venezuela. The president was asked 3 months, 6 months, a year, how long? And he said, I would say much longer. How long is the U.S. going to be running Venezuela?
Well, look, Secretary Rubio, President Trump have outlined clear national security concerns when it comes to Venezuela. And they've been talking about those for a very long time. They've been talking about them since even before he took office. That's the gangs coming out of Venezuela, the drug trafficking we saw, of course, the oil talking about, also foreign hostile nations using it as a foothold. So I think we're talking about addressing those concerns that we have here, making sure that in our hemisphere, our home, we're not seeing a nation that is allowing hostile nations to use it as a launch pad for access to our hemisphere. We're not seeing drugs and gangs come out of that nation. We have clear national security concerns, and ultimately, this is about putting the American people first.
So that's the why. How long?
Well, I think the why and the how long are connected. I mean, that's ultimately what we're talking about.
But the average person, I think, just wants to know, like, how long are we going to be there for?
Well, the president's in to defend our interests. And I think ultimately we've seen Secretary Rubio describe the levers that we have currently in place, the quarantine of oil. Of course, we see the agreement that was just announced regarding oil that would be able to come to the United States and then have the Venezuelan regime buy American with the proceeds of that oil. So we have levers in place in order to influence that policy, in order to see the direction that we want it to go. That's what we're talking about here. And ultimately, it's about defending the national interests of the American people.
Is it out of the question that President Trump and Secretary Rubio, during their tenure over the next 3 years, that they could be running Venezuela, or the U.S. could be running Venezuela for the entirety of that?
Well, look, again, as Caroline Leavitt said just yesterday, the president is not in the business of ruling out his options. Maybe that's what previous presidents did, but not President Trump. President Trump is going to keep his options open to defend the national interests of the American people. And that's why I started there. Because this is truly about defending our national interests, and we're going to make sure that in our hemisphere, our home, we don't have a nation, a regime that is sending things into our country that kill Americans, tens of thousands of Americans every single year.
Let me take you to that back of the envelope math, which is the number of how much oil Venezuela has market price. We're talking somewhere in the area of $17 trillion. And I keep hearing from the president that we are going to be taking the oil. Who's we? This is the question that I haven't been able to figure out yet. Who's we? Is it money coming from Venezuelan oil sales that eventually makes its way back into the U.S. Treasury?
Well, look, we see Chris Wright, the energy secretary, that's leading a lot of this effort in terms of the recent deal that was struck, where we're seeing between 30 and 50 million barrels of oil come to the United States being sold at market rates, and then that revenue being used to the benefit of the American people and the Venezuelan people, not going to a corrupt regime in Venezuela, not being used for corruption or otherwise, to the benefit of the American people and the Venezuelan people. That's what we're talking about here. And we have a team that's working on this. Chris Wright is working on this. The president's team is working on this. But ultimately, what's important here is using that revenue so it doesn't go to a few select people, doesn't go to corruption, benefits both nations.
But the 30 to 50 million barrels is a fraction, right? Like I just showed, I mean, if you do the math, it's a couple $2 billion. And so what I'm wondering, Tommy, is when the president talks about we are going to be taking the oil, is it possible that the president's thinking about hundreds of billions, trillions of dollars of Venezuelan oil coming into the United States, into Uncle Sam's bank account, essentially?
Well, Secretary Rubio outlined 3 steps here in terms of what we're looking at. First is the stabilization of the country, and we're seeing agreements in terms of that 30 to 50 million that might contribute in that effort. The second is what you might call recovery, talking about access for Western companies into Venezuela in order to facilitate the production of more oil. And then the third is that transition. So those might overlap to some degree, but we're talking about the stabilization, the recovery, and then the transition. We're only a couple days in here, so 30 to 50 million is quite a lot of oil, but of course there's more to do, more to go, and we're going to see what that looks like in the days ahead.
Is it possible that we're talking about trillions of dollars coming back into the United States?
Well, I think what we're hopeful here is that we see a trade relationship. We see a relationship with this oil production that benefits the people of the United States and the people of Venezuela.
Let me ask you about a headline coming involving Greenland. U.S. officials and White House aides, Reuters reports have discussed that maybe the United States could be looking at a scenario in which we give $10,000 to $100,000 per person to try to sway Greenlanders to join the United States. Is that seriously being considered right now?
Well, like as Caroline Leavitt said, again, I think in reaction to something on Greenland, the president is not ruling out any sort of options. I'm not going to rule out options here either. Okay. And ultimately, the president's been very clear about the national security concerns regarding Greenland, the concerns we have with certain countries that have access to the Arctic concerns, the national security concerns for the United States.
Last one for you, Cuba. I had Senator Rick Scott on the show earlier this week. Here's what he said about the possible liberation of Cuba, and then we'll pick it up on the other side.
I'd like everything to happen today for the kids of Venezuela, for the kids of Cuba. But I think it's going to happen. You know, I think it will probably happen maybe this year, maybe next year.
Possible liberation of Cuba maybe this year or next year. Does that sound right to you from your perch at the State Department?
Well, President Trump said that there was that connection between Cuba and Venezuela that's been well documented. And so we'll see what happens. I always try to avoid the prediction business from my perspective here. But as President Trump said, he views Cuba as possibly ready to fall in terms of that regime there. So ultimately, everything is going back to our national interests. That's why I keep stressing it. That's the main policy here, defending our national interests and the interests of the American people.
Is it out of the question that you could see a liberation of Cuba at some point this year?
Well, again, I'm not going to get into the prediction business here. I've learned to not get into that.
All right, we'll leave it there. Tommy Pigott, State Department Deputy Principal Spokesperson.
Thank you.
Deputy Spokesperson.
Yes,
Thanks, Tommy. Appreciate it. All right, still to come here on the Hill. President Trump says he wants to boost the defense budget up to $1.5 trillion. More than the entire military budget of every country, or some of the biggest countries in the world. So what does that say about our military right now? We dig into it with Congressman Don Bacon on the other side, and something that hasn't happened in the Golden State in over 25 years. Why Californians are actually soaking it in. We'll explain when we return. All right, just about 6:30 here on the East Coast, 5:30 across the Midwest tonight. And here's some of the stories that we are monitoring and in our newsroom at this hour. ICE operations underway once again in Minneapolis, just one day after a woman died during that ICE-involved shooting. Protests erupting in the city over the last couple of days. This, again, live look in Minneapolis. You can see part of the scene there. Minnesota officials accused the officer of acting recklessly, but the Trump administration stands behind that officer, saying he acted in self-defense. The Homeland Security Secretary, Kristi Noem, saying today the administration not backing down on immigration enforcement.
sanctuary policies, whether they're here in New York City, whether they're in California, Illinois, or Minneapolis. If you are a criminal, illegal alien, we are coming to get you. We will arrest you. We will bring justice, and we will also bring safety to the American people.
Our Allie Bradley is live with the very latest once again for us in Minneapolis tonight. Allie?
Yeah, hey, Blake. So we know those operations continued today. We know Commander-at-Large Gregory Bovino was out there with his teams after he was out here on the line. Protests continue out here in front of the Whipple building. That is a federal building that ICE is basically gathering at every single day where we've seen protests. So let me move out of the way so you can see kind of what's going on. We still have about 50 protesters here. On the other side of the road is Border Patrol and ICE basically holding court right now, standing in front of the federal building, blocking the access to that area. And we've seen them use less lethal munitions several times today in different situations, whether it be someone threw a Gatorade bottle at them, someone actually went up and shoved one of these individuals. They were impeding the vehicles from leaving. Every single time something like that happens, we see the tensions really rise and escalate here. But take a listen to what one protester told us why he's here and what they're doing out here today. Take a listen.
Minnesota takes care of each other, okay? Yeah, we got problems, but showing up with jackboots on the ground every single day and forcing us to try to acquiesce to their whims and wills and telling us they're making us safe is just absolute lie.
Now, we know a little bit more about that officer who was involved as well. We know that based on our DHS sources, he was actually with the Minneapolis station here in the Twin Cities, and he'd been with ICE ERO, which is the enforcement and removal operations arm of ICE, and he'd been with them for 10 years. But he was actually on the SRT team, which is a specialized unit, kind of like the SWAT arm of ICE. And so he actually was on that team. And then he was also involved in an incident in June in St. Paul, where an illegal immigrant target actually dragged him about 100 yards, left him injured in that incident. So he's no stranger to vehicle incidents out here over the last 6 months, too, that he personally has been involved in. Of course, you have these protesters out here right now chanting shame. They want that officer to be arrested. Blake, they told me the only video that they want to see is that officer being arrested. Blake.
Our Allie Bradley continues our coverage there in Minneapolis this evening. Allie, thank you. Now over to Cleveland, Ohio, and this is a story our next star station, Fox 8, is watching closely there. Police arresting 3 suspects in a November break-in at the Cleveland Browns quarterback Shedeur Sanders' his home. The suspects are accused of breaking into Sanders' home at the time that he was on the field making his regular season debut as that team's starting quarterback. They allegedly stole about $200,000 worth of luxury bags, other items. One suspect remains on the run. This, of course, the latest in a string of burglaries taking place at the homes of high-profile NFL players while they were playing NFL games. Victims include Patrick Mahomes, Travis Kelce, and the Cincinnati Bengals quarterback Joe Burrow. Here's a look, by the way, mountain landscape in California tonight. Looks beautiful, right? Not far from L.A. How about this? A heavy rain there over the past week has pushed the Golden State toward a big milestone. Get this, not a single square mile, not one, of the state is listed as dry on the U.S. Drought Monitor. Now, that's notable because it's the first time that has happened in 25 years. At least a small part of the state has been listed as dry or in drought since December 2000. Some good news, of course, heading into the wildfire season there. Meantime, back here in Washington, the Senate today advancing a bill to block the commander-in-chief from taking additional military action against Venezuela without congressional approval. As The Hill reports tonight, 5 Republicans joined Democrats in that vote in a rebuke to the administration's operations in the Caribbean.
Right now, we have removed one socialist, and the rest of the socialists are still there. There are some real questions that will go on that Congress needs to be involved. One, on the initiation of war. But if there's a blockade of a country, a military blockade of a country is an act of war as well. It's also quite expensive.
On social media, President Trump lashing out at those 5 Republicans who voted for the measure. Senators Rand Paul, Susan Collins, Lisa Murkowski, Josh Hawley, and Todd Young. He said they shouldn't be elected to office ever again. The bill goes up for a full vote in the Senate next week. If it passes, it then heads to the House. Well, the commander-in-chief also unveiling plans to ask Congress for a record $1.5 trillion military budget. That is roughly more than $600 billion higher than our current defense budget. The president saying the increase would help build his quote-unquote dream military. Some numbers for you here. The U.S. spent about $320 billion on the military before 9/11. Since then, the budget has steadily risen. Until 2011, it was about $750 billion. Former President Obama reined in some defense spending, but since President Trump took office in 2017, the Pentagon budget has increased, now roughly $900 billion. For context, the president's ask of $1.5 trillion is greater than the economic output of the entire countries of Indonesia, the Netherlands, Saudi Arabia, Poland, and Switzerland. The Nebraska Republican Congressman Don Bacon sits on the House Armed Services Committee, joins us live here on the Hill, retired general, 20 years, brigadier general, as 20 years of service.
30 years of service.
30 years of service, excuse me, sir.
It's all good.
With us tonight here on the Hill. You're in favor, thank you for coming in, you're in favor of this. Tell me why.
Well, right now we were actually spending a historically low number per GDP. So 3% was where we were at like a year or two ago. Historically, like under Reagan, it was 6% GDP. Before that was even higher. And so I would like to get us back to about a 4% or 5% GDP spending for defense, which has been the norm since World War II or after World War II. So his goal to get us back to 5% GDP is not unheard of. I mean, it's 5%. It was the norm for a long time. And if we don't do this, it's going to be very hard to remodernize all of our nuclear weapons, to get the 5th and 6th generation fighters, renew all our Navy shipbuilding, and take care of our troops.
So look, this would be basically a 65% increase over currently what we have now. That would suggest what we have now is inadequate.
It is inadequate.
But I haven't heard folks like I haven't heard a lot of members from Congress, and the president clearly could have gone higher, saying, you know what, we're in a whole lot of trouble. I just watched a very successful, the B-2 bombers fly into Iran. I mean, my gosh, what we saw in Venezuela the other week. So it seems like we have what we have.
Well, it's really good for Venezuela. It's not so good if we're talking about China and other higher level threats. We only have 20 B-2 bombers, for example. And so if we want to replace our bomber force, our ICBMs, by the way, are 50 years old. We're still flying the B-52. The youngest B-52 was built a year before I was born, in 1962. So we have a very aging nuclear enterprise. And if we want to build the amount of 5th and 6th generation fighters and ships, 3% GDP spending, and right now it's 3.3, it's inadequate.
What would you say? Like, I have a lot of these military experts on who say Ukraine flew drones that are $250, $500, that you could basically go to Best Buy or somewhere and do the same thing. Isn't that kind of the new warfare that we're in right now?
I think it's a necessary part of warfare, but it will not win against China or other high-end threats. I think we need that. We're behind on the low, I call it commercial off-the-shelf technology. We got to do a better job there. And Ukraine has been awesome. We can learn from Ukraine a lot. But that does not defeat or deter China if they want to go towards Taiwan, for example. So you're going to need 5th and 6th generation, the F-47, the future F-47, the F-35s. We don't have enough right now to deter China or do other things that we want to do in Europe or the Middle East. So, 3% was historically a low, and it's not enough to do what we want to do and also pay our troops.
The president calling for $1.5 trillion. It's a nice, big, round, shiny number. You know how he operates. It puts the goalposts and then they move, or he would call it the art of the deal. Where do you think this eventually lands with Republicans in Congress?
Probably more like 4%. You're not going to be able
to. What?
It'd be about 1.2 trillion. So we're at about $1 trillion right now. And so we were trying to push for a 4%. So him coming out with a 5% was a bit of a surprise. But I like the goal, but you're not going to be able to do this in 1 year. You can't, the defense can't assimilate that kind of spending.
So you don't think it just goes from 900 to 1.2?
I think, we'll ramp it up. But I am just pleased if we can get it to 4% GDP, because then we can pay our troops what they need to be paid and take care of all this modernization and new weapons.
We've got thousands of officers there, and I'm not opposed to sending more if necessary to keep people safe.
There is no verifiable evidence that any of this is making America safer.
The political fallout continuing to grow in the wake of the deadly ICE-involved shooting in Minneapolis on Wednesday. You heard there from the DHS Secretary Kristi Noem today doubling down on the administration's immigration actions, while the Minnesota Governor Tim Walz continues to question whether any of this is doing any sort of good for his community. Full panel here with me now. Daniela Diaz, congressional reporter for the digital news outlet Notice. Kurt Bardella, NewsNation contributor, Democratic strategist, and Bill McGinley, former White House cabinet secretary in the first administration. Bill, Kurt, hello to you both. Daniela, hello. Nice to see you again. We saw both sides today dug in. You have DHS now saying more agents are going into Minnesota. You have Minnesota officials saying, get out of here.
That's exactly right. And it's going to be the issue. I mean, you saw J.D. Vance, Vice President J.D. Vance, behind the podium today defending the administration's decisions, saying this was a woman who clearly attacked an ICE official, and this is why you saw him defending himself. They're not backing down on this. They're more dug in, and we're just going to see both sides more dug in. I've been watching coverage on this channel of what's going on right now in Minneapolis, and it's just getting worse. It's escalating. It doesn't seem like it's going to die anytime soon.
Why do you think they put Vance at the podium?
It was clear that they wanted to send a message. That's how I interpreted this. That's how lawmakers on Capitol Hill interpreted this. I was talking to them all day. Democrats and Republicans, they are holding their stance that this was something that they believed is defensible, and they are going to stick by that and not blink.
Bill, here was some of the language from the vice president at the podium today, and then we'll pick it up.
We're going to get tougher at the people who are defrauding the United States by inciting violence against our law enforcement officers. That's one of the things that we're going to do. We've already started that work at the Department of Justice, but we're going to keep on doing it, and this new AAG position is going to kick that into high gear.
That's part of the message from J.D. Vance. What do you make of the positioning out of the White House this evening?
I think they're going to fully support ICE and the agents. I think the other thing that they're going to do is start calling on governors and state and local police departments to start fully cooperating with ICE, so that when they're arresting illegal aliens for various crimes, they should be contacting ICE so they get out. That's going to smooth out the process. What the vice president was trying to say there was a couple of things. Number one, looking at the fraud in Minnesota, the allegations, serious allegations, billions of dollars, the announcement of a new associate attorney general, but also supporting ICE and the officer who's been accused. It sounds like they've reviewed the tape. It sounds like they feel that he's going to fall within the borders of qualified immunity at the federal level and should be fine. This officer has a distinguished career with ICE and has been injured before by a car, according to the reporting that I've read about this. So it's not like he was unfamiliar with this type of situation with the car coming at him.
Kurt?
I think that this is going to backfire tremendously for Republicans. We have been spending the last few weeks talking about what? Affordability. And here we have now a situation where the administration is going to dig in and go to their furthest right side. And I feel like it comes off almost as a distraction. It's like, again, this year has been Venezuela. Now it's ICE. And all the while, the condition of the American people's pocketbooks keeps getting worse and worse and worse. And it just looks like their eye isn't on the ball. This plays great with their base. It motivates and incites and activates the diehard supporters that they already have, who already believe in ICE, who already believe in the immigration enforcement. I think it just does nothing, though, but hurt them politically when we look at the midterms calculus.
You said you were speaking to folks up on the Hill all day, Congressman Bacon, as he was walking out. You said, I'll chat with you tomorrow, sir.
See him every day.
What are they saying to you about what they're hearing out of the White House and what they want to see going forward?
This is a great question for me, because I just wrote a story about this. Right? Yeah. You know, I was asking Democrats all day. They have said that they're against what happened in Venezuela. They're against what we're seeing in Minneapolis. And we were wondering if they were going to do anything with that leverage when it comes to government funding. A deadline's coming up at the end of the month. They really don't have a lot of power in the minority. They do not want to use this against Republicans right now, despite the fact that you're seeing them protest what's happening in Minneapolis, and of course, these briefings that they're receiving on Capitol Hill in Venezuela. So while Republicans are holding their ground and saying that they stand with the administration on how they've handled this, Democrats are not that eager to start another shutdown over this issue, and they don't really have a plan on how they plan to tackle this in the first place.
I think one of the other problematic things in general here is the Republican majority has actually gotten smaller in the last couple of days. They're down to basically a 1-vote margin. So really, anybody is in a situation to potentially hold the House hostage to get whatever it is that they might want to get. And people like Thomas Massie could be really problematic for Republicans as they try to pass these budgets.
Bill, when I look at, this is currently the largest immigration operation ever in Minneapolis. And today the administration said more ICE agents are going in. When you look at the polling, deporting immigrants living in the U.S. illegally, 58% support that, right? This is anything today involving immigration to get nearly 60% is pretty much close to consensus, or as big of a number as you're probably going to find. But then when it essentially comes to the question of execution, which is how the president is handling deportations, only 42% approve. It's minus 13. Is it wise of the administration to double down here when the American public is clearly saying, we agree with the overall policy, we don't necessarily agree with how you're executing it, how you're handling it?
Yeah, I think looking at immigration enforcement and what ICE has been up to and what DHS has been up to also has to be coupled with the decline in violent crime. And basically the overall law enforcement strategy of the Trump administration to make cities safe. We've seen it here in the District of Columbia. Things are much better out there now. It's cleaner. I think people are out. Restaurants are full. And I think when you have these roundups, I agree, there are some optics that are there. But it's also the result of 4 years of neglect under Joe Biden, allowing everybody in, and we don't know who's here. So ICE is actually trying to get the people out. The one thing I will say, and I'll agree with you on one thing, what I'd like to see from the administration, and I think they're doing a fantastic job, not only do you have to have the ICE enforcement to do what they've been doing, they need to couple it with workforce training. We need to take Americans and train them for the jobs of tomorrow. The economy is evolving at a rapid rate with AI and a lot of other developments that are going on, and we need to take some of these flyover states, blue-collar workers, retrain them, and get them into the jobs that are going to be open once these data centers and other things are beginning to evolve. It needs to be coupled together.
Yeah, I just want to point out the one thing here, and then Secretary Noem talked about we're trying to make Americans safer. It wasn't a legal immigrant here who got killed. It wasn't a legal immigrant who did a violent crime. The violent crime that happened was against an American citizen, and it was an American citizen who lost her life.
The administration would say that, and I'm sure Bill would point out, that they believe that the officer was acting in self-defense and thus going after a federal officer.
Sure, but I suspect that polling that you pointed out of the execution of the enforcement, that's only going to go further down after something like this.
And I've said this on both ways. There's going to be a robust investigation. Let's withhold judgment. Because I think there's a lot of that tape that we haven't seen. And I want to see, how did she get her car to that place in the middle of those ICE officers? Everybody's focusing on the ICE officer standing at the driver's side window and not focusing on the ICE officer who was standing in front of the car when she hit the gas.
I'm going to give you the last word here. But Bill, at one point, Donald Trump named you his top lawyer for this term. But you're here with us, so thank you. You ended up not going forward with it, but I want to tap into you. What is that what is that investigation going to look like, and do you have any issues with it being handled solely at the federal level and not as a Republican,
Federal law enforcement officer executing federal court orders to round up the people that ICE was trying to detain and deport. It is a federal matter. I don't think that this is a state matter.
I'll give you the last word.
I have to say that a lot of voters are likely going to see this issue as something that is going to distract from what exactly Kurt was saying. Affordability is really what will help Republicans keep their majorities in the midterms. And with Venezuela and with what's happening in Minneapolis, a lot of voters that I talk to are saying we need to get back into making sure we can afford things.
Daniela, Kurt, Bill, thank you so much. Appreciate it. Still to come. Other side of the break. One of the names floated as a possible 2028 contender just said, you know what? He's moving forward with his political career, but exactly where and what is Josh Shapiro doing next when we return? All right, if you're just getting home, trying to catch up on some of today's top stories, here's some Hill headlines before we head out tonight. Lawmakers this evening voted to extend health care subsidies for the next 3 years. House greenlights ACA subsidies extension with backing of 17 Republicans. That is a blow to Republican leadership in the House. Next, the bill goes to the Senate, where pressure is building for a similar bipartisan compromise with a slim chance of passing. Without action, we've been talking about this for a while. The 24 million Americans who use the Affordable Care Act, their premiums continue to rise. Meantime, the Democratic Governor Josh Shapiro running again for governor in the Keystone State. Shapiro to run for re-election in Pennsylvania. And this is the stuff that we're really going to be talking about amid talk of White House bid. Shapiro formally launching his re-election today, touting more than $30 million cash on hand. He makes the announcement as speculation continues to grow about whether this is just a stop before a potential White House 2028 announcement. We'll see. And finally, people named Karen can breathe a sigh of relief. Gen Z picks its own Karen name. Sorry, Jessica. For years, millennials have used the term Karen as a derogatory term to describe women who behave in an entitled way, but the younger generation now phasing out that term, apparently using Jessica instead. As the headline says, sorry, Jessica. To check those stories more, all you have to do, head on over to thehill.com. By the way, I write for the Morning Report newsletter. Scan that QR code on your screen. All right, before we head out tonight, this just came in seconds ago. The FBI in Portland is investigating a shooting involving a Customs and Border Patrol agents. Authorities say 2 people were wounded. The FBI in Portland says, quote, this remains an active and ongoing investigation led by the FBI.